All
Hi
right.
everyone, welcome to the live stream to this interview. And today I have a very special guest. His name is Richie Norton, and Richie is joining us from Oahu, Hawaii. Richie, do you mind saying hi to the audience?
Hey, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. This will be fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it too because I had a privilege, I would say, to read the book of Richie's new book called Anti-Time Management. That is, that was published in the US about 2 years ago, I think, and then now through Zhongyi is being translated and brought to the readers in China. So thanks to his work, we have a chance of, talking about this book and also all the concepts, all the practices, all the tools that he brought to the readers from this book. Really looking forward. So before I get started, I'll probably spend a few minutes to introduce who Richie is, and we'll all know him a bit better throughout the conversation. So I think it's very hard to describe. I think he's born in San Diego, moved to Brazil, and later to Oahu. But from reading the book, I know he has been to many places in the world, and he has many, I guess, tags or labels, if you will. He's a best-selling author. He has actually put on quite a few books. The other book name is really catching as well, How to Start Something Stupid, The Power of Starting Something Stupid. And then
That's
also
right.
the other book called Resume Are Dead and What to Do About It. So both are best-selling books and being translated to more than 10 languages. But in addition to writing, or I guess writing is more a byproduct of what he's doing, he's actually a entrepreneur himself, founded product.com, helped a lot of other businesses to start. And he's also a world-renowned business coach. I think he's ranked number, on the top 100 on the globally recognized executive coaches, helping CEOs of different sizes of enterprises in achieving their best. So definitely a highly achieved individual, but this he also has a very interesting family life. He lives with his family in Hawaii now. His wife is Natalie, right?
Yep. That's
And
right.
yeah, they have four boys. One of them unfortunately has passed, but I think if you don't mind, we can talk about it. That he did mention that experience in his book. And also they have fostered three children, and also a bit of a bittersweet experience. So and then all of that, I think for some of us, as Richie probably know, a lot of my readers are female working mothers who struggle with one child. So
Mm.
I think we'll also get into that in this talk as well, and how he managed life, the role as a father, as a husband, and of course all the great things he's doing. So with that, I can't wait to get started. So Richie, I was actually, your book is very captivating. It was like, the first page I opened, the first few pages I was reading was like, I was reading this like a thriller. Or, you talked about this experience where you got this text um,
Mm.
around this ballistic missile,
Mhm.
and also sort of, this was a very real near-death experience. Can you probably, share with us about that story for those of our readers who haven't read the book?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing all that up too. You're so good. You're so good. This will be so amazing to talk about it through this lens. But I was I was traveling. I was working, and I was actually a couple thousand miles away from home. And I get this text saying that there's a ballistic missile that's going to blow up Hawaii. And then there's a follow up to it that said this is not a test. And I thought this is crazy. So I call my wife, I call my children, nobody answers. Eventually my son answers. I think he's 12 or 13 at the time, and he says, "I love you, Dad." And he was telling me his goodbyes. Like, you don't imagine yourself as a father thinking that you're going to hear your son say his goodbyes. So this became really real. And, eventually we learned that it was a mistake, that it wasn't actually happening and everyone is okay. But for those 30 or 40 minutes, however long it was, everyone in Hawaii really thought this was the end. And for me, it made me realize a couple of different things. One, again, how precious my family is, that we don't just work to work, we work for them. there's another reason we're doing the work that we do, and it's not the work necessarily. It's what we get from it or who we're helping because of it. But it also reminded me that this is what's strange is that in the moment I didn't have regrets. And this is because a lot of times when you think of your last moments with someone, you might think, oh, all my regrets. The reason I didn't feel like I had regrets was because we had tried to live our life in a different way because we had actually experienced lots of tragedies before. I had learned early on that it's important to value your time, not time your values. Meaning, if you believe in something, do it. Don't tell yourself you're going to wait till you have more time, more education, more experience, and more money to do it, because by then it might be too late. So, my brother in law passed away at 21 in his sleep. And this changed the way we thought about growing old. I don't know where it's like everywhere else in the world, but in the United States, people plan on living and working till about 65, and after 65, living this dream they always had. But not everybody gets to live that long, and not everything works out that way. So certainly for my brother-in-law, it wasn't that way. So I started thinking, wow, how can we live our lives in a way that allows us to help more people now
Mm-hmm.
and put more time for our family now, even when we don't actually have all the means to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, When you ask a better question, you get a better answer. So if you tell yourself I can't because, then your brain will just tell you you're right, you can't do it.
Yeah.
But if you create space by asking a question, how can I do this thing without this bad thing happening by this amount of time? It allows you to start thinking more creatively
Mm-hmm.
around how you might create something. So
Yeah.
a few years later, my we had our fourth son, and we named
Mm-hmm.
him Gavin after my brother-in-law Gavin, who had passed away. And this Gavin brought us so much joy, but he had this cough. And we took him to the doctors. They said he'd be fine. We took him back to the doctors. They said he'd be fine. Eventually, we end up in the hospital, and they finally tested for something called whooping cough or pertussis.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that's what he had. At this point in his little life, even though he'd gotten all the shots he needed and all the things he needed, it was just too much on his little body. And I remember in the hospital, a nurse came and she said to us, "You should stay the night," which is a weird thing to say because we always stayed the night. It wasn't like we were like leaving or something. But what she was really saying was she was just cueing us in that this is probably his last night.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I'm like on one side of his little bed, my wife's on the other, and we're just, we're crying, we're just wishing it was different. And we we knew that this could ruin us, our relationship, just we just know that even statistically, tragedies can hurt, people and relationships. It changes the way your whole life is. But we told ourselves almost in a way of wishing, but also a promise like we're going to become better, not bitter.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try and live better and be closer because of him and not let this experience tear us apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember holding him for a moment, and then my wife holding him as she's rocking him in a chair. And I have my right hand on his little heart, just listening for those last beats, and we're singing him lullabies. And he passes away. And it was such a horrible, and also it was a sacred experience, at the same time. But I remember leaving the hospital empty handed. And I asked my wife later, like, how did you do that? And she said, I don't know. She said she felt like there was another Natalie inside of her, someone that's more courageous than her that maybe held her hand. We don't always know how strong we are until we have to deal with it. And that doesn't make it any better at all. But I believe that grief is a tunnel, not a cave. Meaning, as long as we keep moving forward, we're not necessarily giving up or moving on. These things become part of our lives. But as long as we're moving forward, we can become better because of our experiences. And I know people listening, they may have had a similar experience or may have not, or have had different experiences. There's no comparing pain. pain is pain. It fills your whole body, your whole soul, the whole room, and it stops you from living your dreams and doing what you want to do. So what I learned is it's important to, because a lot of people will search for meaning. What does this mean? And they'll go back to their belief systems or anything. But I learned I can assign positive meaning to any situation. And even if it's a terrible situation, this can help me make choices that will improve my situation
Yeah.
moving forward.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that. I'm sure many of our audience listening, just like me, your heart aches, even listening to it. And uh, I and then that's not the end of it. And in the book, he talked
It's
about
not the end. That's
had a
right.
stroke, right, when she was 35. And so that's why I was saying the book, once I opened a few pages, I can't stop reading. I was like, what's going on with this guy? Like, and oh my God. And then and I have to say, Richie, when I was reading your book, I think you didn't use these words directly, but your book is deeply, deeply Buddhist. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, so the whole thing about first thing, the whole thing about impermanence, um good things, bad things happen to good people, and then that's, I mean, Chinese call 无常, meaning like, you can't just sort of, there is no it's not definitive, like because I do good things therefore I get what. That's not how the world works, and lots of our suffering comes from not being able to accept that. So there's definitely one. And then, of course, in Buddhism, you probably know the sort of one, that the first noble truth is life is all about dukkha. Dukkha, well, it can be lamely transferred to suffering. But the suffering is not only, say, a loss of life or painful experience. I think the deep meaning of suffering is that how we view our relationship to it. Like,
Yes.
of course, if I lost my arm, I suffer, right? So I get into a car accident, I suffer. But and I think you use those words. I mean, yes, this gave you pain, but pain doesn't necessarily equal to suffering.
Mm.
You actually can make a choice saying that yes, that's very painful, but I can decide how I deal with the situation as another Natalie, as you talked about. I think this whole another Natalie thing is basically the essence of the bigger being, and then you use it very simple and powerful words. And that's how I felt reading your book. I think you don't use those words, but like, the whole point about looking at time not as a vessel or a tool, but use it as, almost you flip it, you call it time tipping, right? I think that's
Hmm.
what's in the word. But basically that's deeply Buddhist.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Means a lot. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Very
yeah.
cool.
Thank you for that. And I think that's why, I'll say this in Chinese. 大家可以在书里，在那个购物车看到这本书哈，大家可以点到，可以翻到这本书。Yeah, the reason I want to say that is because when people first read the title of the book or read your bio, and people will say, "Wow, yeah, this is some, dude with unlimited resources, right? From a rich family, he has a privileged life. Of course, he can do all those anti-management thing. He can run his business on the."
Mm.
On a road trip. I can't, right? Because I don't
Mm.
have that kind of life. Look at me. I'm just in Chinese called 普通人. I'm just a commoner. Like I can't.
Mm.
But I think that's why your book is so powerful, because you actually talked about not only you're not a commoner, you're actually worse than a lot of commoners.
That is true.
I know, right? Losing your brother-in-law at 21, losing a 2-month-old baby. And also you talk about your 12-year-old son got into a serious car accident. All these things, if one of them happened to us, this is tragic, right? Catastrophic.
Yes.
And then many of
Yes.
them happen to you. And then so like first of all, you're if a commoner are sort of ground zero, you're like a negative.
Yes. It's true. It's true. It's sad to say. And but like you said, I would look at it and I go, okay, my brother-in-law passed away, my son passed away, my wife has a stroke and loses her memory. She gets it back later, but there's still all kinds of craziness happening. You're right. My son gets hit by a car crossing the street, on his bike. And I started thinking, like, these are terrible things, what's happening. But then I have to realize too, they're not necessarily all, it wasn't like a catalyst, like one thing happened and then the next thing happened because of that. it's like we live in a world where just terrible things happen all the time. But also lots of good things happen all the time that we're blind to. Because there's like more goodness than bad,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So when we look, especially on social media too, when you look at someone's highlight reel, you go, wow. Like you were saying, if you read my bio, you're like, wow, this guy has the world. Like, this is amazing. And it's true. But if you look at like, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy. Like if you look at like all the other side of it, you go, this guy has the worst life ever. And that's the whole yin and yang thing. Like we have both happening at the same time. And
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. That's that's so funny, Richie. That's kind of what I said in my book as well. Because in a way, I have a probably similarly, glorious profile, as you can tell. I mean, like if you put it up in
Yep.
the
Yep.
Bible. But that's what I said. If you put on social media, look at that. It's like, everybody, if you have, if you think about if it's a ball, like a sphere, and then you have 100 pieces around it, right? And then of course the ones we show other people, if we put on your social media or you put it on bio, are the best of the best. You pick those few lines. You
Sure.
don't tell them like your toddler through tantrum today on the floor and couldn't go to the bathroom and get another diaper wet. You don't say those things, right? So,
That's right.
but that's also part of life. And that's also the other, I think that first of all, there are a lot of common things around us. And second, as you said, there are a lot of good things happen. I think it's this whole concept that's also kind of deeply Buddhist as well, saying the whole point is that life is a miracle. Like
Mm.
the world is a miracle, right? So even the fact that the earth exists in universe is a miracle. Like we are living in this miracle. But like then we don't, we tend not to see it because then many things, like it's almost the choice or I guess first of all, awareness of there are those good things. And second, after being aware there are good things, you can make a different choice. I think that's really throughout your book, you're talking about choices and talking
Yes.
about a different level of awareness,
Yes.
right?
Yes, I love that. And but also when someone reads my bio or your bio and they're confronted with, they may not know the context. But they're confronted with, they think that's our reality and versus they're comparing our good reality, comparing it to their bad reality, which isn't
Yeah.
fair. It's not fair, to them, or we all do it. But there's another side to it. People will say, well, then what do I do? How do I do it? What if I don't have all these things that I need? And I sum it up in a lot of different ways in the book, and I give tools and ideas and ways to create projects. But ultimately, if you decide who you want to be, you'll know what to do. Because ultimately, the outcome of our habits are becoming someone. So people will try and choose better habits, but they still don't become the person they wanted to become because they still chose habits that didn't serve the person they wanted to become.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why anti-time management is so important, is because I know time management it's a good word. It helps people be productive. I get that. But when I looked at the history of time management and I realized it was in fact created to manage people's time in a way that took their freedom, that took their autonomy, that took their ability away, that took their creativity away, that in essence almost forced them to be a certain type of person and basically took all their freedom and time away, I realized, oh, no wonder when people try to manage their time better, they lose their time because it was never designed to create time. It was designed to take time. So it's not about managing time. Time just is a thing that happens no matter what. It's who controls your time.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
anti-time management is I control my time. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that history. So interesting because earlier I had a interview or conversation with the sociologist. Her name is Arlie Russell Hochschild. She's already 84, but she in 1997 wrote this book called Time Bind. And then even back then, she's reviewing how corporate culture is, basically creating, he called it temporal prison.
Mm.
And then like how people were actually living in this kind of temporal prison.
Yes.
Yeah, and then like I think it's a remarkable book as well, and I was amazed at its foresight. That was 1997, that's even before the .com, all the big tech company and all that. And then she already talked about it, and then she was working with a very traditional sort of Midwest based U.S. corporation with 20,000 employees. And then in that book, he mentioned the same reference as you did in your book, the 1991 book by Frederick Taylor. the principles of scientific management, which really shaped, those the mega structure the current industry or current corporate life or current whatever business world is living in. And I'm glad you're actually referring to the same book and talking about actually how we have been born or, almost kind of sleepwalking into a system that's quite powerful.
Yes. Yes. And so, and you know how there's like the saying that fish discover water last.
Right.
Like a fish doesn't know that it's in water, right? Until it gets pulled out, right?
Yeah.
And so when someone sees our bio or sees someone else doing good, it's like becoming a fish out of water. You're all of a sudden confronted with reality that you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was possible. How do I do it? Then you have to make up a bunch of excuses. But after that process, you can finally say, but who do I want to be? And at that point, you can tip time and you can just basically rescue your dreams from the end of a timeline, put it front and center. Yeah. It's like a castle. Like there's you see a castle, you see a moat around it. The people that are just doing their thing all day long, they're like in the moat trying to reach the castle, when in reality you could change the way you work, where you're living life from the dream or from the castle, and your work, the moat, supports and protects your dream. So the longer you wait to do a thing, the less likely you are to become it, because we already know the more we do of something, the more we do become it. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, how can I shrink down the time that it takes to do it? And a lot of times it's just about doing it right now. And once you decide you're going to do it now, then you will say, but I can't. But when you finally do that, you will realize that most of your I can'ts don't even matter.
Yeah.
Because you can do it. And if you ask someone what they really want, if they say I have a goal, and I say, well, what's the goal of the goal? The goal changes. And all of a sudden, the goal of the goal is something like, I want more time with my kids. And you go, that's free, right? You can spend more time with them now. No, I can't. I have all this work. But that's how you improve. You have to think through these things.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think I have to say to the audience who's listening, so this book is full of this piercing thoughts. I call it piercing because it kind of the thing is you look at your environment is that you have to not stop at the first layer, because first layer all seem very reasonable. Okay, like, oh yeah, I'm of course I'm busy. I have work to do. But like then you ask the next question. Okay, you do all this work for what? Okay, to be successful. Okay, then so you want to be successful, then for what? And then so, okay, so I can start, spend more time with my kids. Well, your kids is in front of you right now. Right?
That's right. But
that's the thing. But I have to then throw you a hard question, because I got this question all the time. They will say, wow, yes, they're in front of me right now. But, I don't have, I want a better economic, condition. I want to have more money. I have a bigger house. I can't just say focus on him. If I don't work now to get more money to pay the mortgage or to pay for the down payment of my dream house, how can I do that, right? So like then, how do you answer that?
So it's a great question, and they're right? They're not wrong. Like, these are real questions. So before I wrote Anti-Time Management, I wrote a book that's also translated in Chinese. It's called The Power of Starting Something Stupid. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what I learned was people could start their stupid ideas. A stupid idea really is that thing you really want to do, but you're scared because you're afraid you can't do it. So I teach you how to start it. But what I realized was a lot of people could figure out how to make more money, and they would start a little side business or they'd start a big business, but it didn't necessarily give them the thing that they were working for. So if someone starts a side business so they can have more time, what happens is a lot of times the business now takes up their time and they have less. So it didn't serve the purpose that it was built for. But if you put the purpose first, meaning let's say the time for the children, these are some, like, I don't know, words in psychology, but it creates a forcing function. So let's just use, everyone says they're a procrastinator. Got it. But procrastinators, they do gigantic work the night before it's due, right? And so in another way, you can think no one's more productive than a procrastinator with a deadline.
So the 10 hours before the deadline.
Yeah. What I'm saying is this. I'm not saying you can't, it is true you might have to do more work or different work or whatever to make more money. That's true. What's not true is that you have to do it in a way that sacrifices what you want or what you love most. When you sacrifice what you love for success, you get neither. How you spend your time is how you show your love. So imagine someone baking a cake. You can't bake a cake without sugar and expect it to be sweet. It'll just be a cake without sugar. And then maybe you'll sprinkle sugar on top and say, oh, it's a good cake. But if life is like your priority and your purposes, you want to bake your priority and your purposes in from the start, like sugar and cake, because that will change the way you do your work. You may choose different work, or you may choose how to do it differently. But because you put the thing you wanted most first, the goal of the goal, you will change the way you work to support them. This actually makes people become innovative, inventive, and creative, where before they just would have been doing the status quo. I'm going to go to work, sacrifice everything that I want to one day help out my family. But by that time, they're already grown and old and doing their own. So it is backwards thinking, but it actually works and can be more productive.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, exactly. I think you use the word, you call it a forcing mechanism or forcing constraint. There was a saying, which I learned from a coach as well, and I actually put in my own book called, they said, no matter how much time you have, your activities will expand to fill the time you have.
Yes.
Right. So if you don't compartmentalize it, you don't say, hey, this is for my family and kids.
That's right.
Then even if you have 8 hours working day, that's not enough. So, even if you have 24 hours, it's not enough because
Not enough.
You're going to create activity. You're going to call someone, you're going to, process some like whatever. So that's exactly right. So I think that's fundamentally the right mindset. Like, you put what's important there first. Maybe you have less time, but because you have less time, you actually forced to be more innovative. And you probably end up, saving a lot of time on things that you didn't even have to do.
That's right.
Right. So yeah, exactly. Thank you for that's a beautiful explanation. I think the other question people would have is that how do I start? Like, I think, people reading your bio will say, well, I see all the outcome, right? But actually, if you read the book, again, by the way, get the book yourself because we're only going to touch a few very, well, at least highlights that I like in the very limited time we have. In the book, you have all, plenty of stories. But Richie mentioned she and her wife, when they started, they used to pick up cans to recycle to get money.
It's true.
To get ends meet. See, I did read your book.
You
And then,
did.
and then like, Natalie used to take on like a photography jobs, whatever, like,
Yep.
freelancer to make some, make some cash. So it
Yes.
feels like you're very typical of sort of a young American couple, right? So like, not very rich, like sort of living just on a, day-to-day basis. Then in that condition, then you have kids, and then you have many kids, right? So like then if we're talking about life priorities, first of all, you don't have a lot of resources. Second, you have a lot of priorities that you want to put forward. Then, then how did you start? How did you become like, how do you start from that, very sort of humble starting point to build something?
So when Natalie and I got married, we told ourselves we wanted to be a certain kind of parents. And that helped decide what we were going to do. So for example, sure, we don't have any money, but we're collecting cans so that we can get money, and maybe our kids are with us and we're having fun. Right? Like, so you can kind of make it a thing when it's impossible. But I'm gonna draw you a little picture. It's a very different, very simple picture.
Please.
If you were to take a piece of paper and just make it like fold it in half twice, long ways, and then the other way, you'll get 4 quadrants. And so what I show in the book is if you write down your goals like this: personal, professional, people, and play. I call it the 4 P's of productivity. And you just write down, who do I want to be personally? Who do I want to be professionally? Who do I want to be with my family and friends and people at work? And who do I want to be? Things that like fill me up, bring me joy, giving back. You end up writing like 5 things on each one, but then you circle only the ones that matter, and you end up coming up with like 4 main things that are important to you. And this becomes like your North Star. Like this directs you on where to go in your life. The reason this is so important is because I've had too many people say they want to do something in 10 years, But think about who you were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you were a different person. Right now, it's 2024. Think about who you were, listeners, in 2014. You were a totally different person. You don't even want your 2014 goals in 2024 anymore. So if you do think that far out, you can collapse time by saying, what if I could do this in 2 years? And then once you've kind of wrapped your head around that, then you can say, but what if I could do it in 6 months? And so every choice you do now says, does this thing bring me closer to or further away? One of those four things: personally, professionally, with the people I love, and play, things I want to do that are fun. And
Yeah.
as you start thinking that way, it'll completely change your life. It creates an environment where it's not an effort to do these things, it becomes natural to do these things. The habits organize themselves around you. And I'll take it one step further to make it very practical. Let's just say, because we're authors, let's say somebody out there wants to write a book. Instead of saying, I want to write a book, say, I have a book project. Because when you have a book project, it means you're writing a book. And when you say, I'm a writer, I'm an author, you just start writing. When you say, I want to do this thing, you end up not doing it. When you say, I have a project, it can have a beginning and an end. It can be an experiment. It gives you permission to fail. Because even if it didn't work out, it was just a project. It was just an experiment. And now all of a sudden, all these things someone's saying, like, I get it. Let's just say you can't quit your job and start a new thing and make money on the side. That's fine. You can still have your same job and do your stuff and make your money. But now you have three other projects that fill you up, that help you want to become who you want to become. So now you're spending your time doing those things. And now your work is supporting it, as opposed to saying, when I finally quit work or when I finally retire, I can do it. Those are two very different lifestyles.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love the 4P. By the way, for people who are listening, really get the book, because the book is full of graphs like that. It's very, it's very rich, and it's very intuitive once you see it. And I especially love how you put play in the 4Ps, because especially for our Asian audience, okay, play is a crime. Okay, you don't play.
Okay.
So like the entire education or work is about, I mean, there's even a word in Chinese called like literally translate to eating bitterness. Like you have to be able to eat bitter, and it's like you have to basically have to endure a lot of hardship. Okay, so like education is about hardship, work is about hardship, and then there's even a saying in Chinese called 吃得苦中苦，方为人上人, means if you want to be, if you can eat the bitterest of the bitter, then you can become the most successful. Okay, so like, so that's kind of, there is this narrative and saying success comes from enduring, comes from suffering, comes from mostly, I guess, enduring. Like, you have to take more, and then therefore currently, for example, in the current tech companies, there's this culture called 996. Well, it was one, at least. It was a big deal. 996 means you start at 9, you finish at 9 a.m. and p.m. and you work 6 days a week. Okay, and so that becomes okay. Then that's being kind of almost applauded, because saying, hey, that's how you become rich. I was saying, so there's almost this narrative, like, to be successful means you don't play. I mean, play is almost viewed as a waste of time. Like you could use the time to study, you could use the time to work to be more productive, and you don't play. I want to hear your words on that. Like why is play important? I mean, isn't that taking away your productive time? Or especially for your kids, like you play with your kids, then how do they get enough time to get good grades in school?
Hmm. These are very, very good questions, and it's ingrained in our cultures. Like, also, in American culture, the things I'm saying also sound crazy to them. Okay, so it is very what we call the hustle culture, where you have to work, where there's a badge of honor for how hard you work and how much you sacrifice. And I'm not saying that those things aren't true. I'm also not saying that they don't work, right? Like, working really hard really works if you're working on the right tasks. And so using this filter of why am I working? What am I working for? Actually changes the nature of your work when you do it, how you do it, why you do it, what you do after you work. So if someone were to say, the more you sacrifice, the more successful you are, that may be true, but it may also not be true because you have to ask under the idea of anti-time management, who's telling you that and why? And what do they have to benefit from it? And what do you have to benefit from it? And if you can decide where you have a choice and where you don't have a choice, then where you don't have a choice, I guess you just do it. But where you do have a choice, you start there. So a lot of people, maybe even if they're working 996, I'm not going to pretend like that would be easy. It sounds very hard. It sounds like you never get a break. But what are you doing in between those hours? What are you doing on Sunday? Right? So these things come into play. So you really have to ask, what am I in control of? What am I not in control of? And can I choose a different responsibility or role so I don't have to do the things that I don't want to do?
Yeah, I love it. You nailed it. Kind of that's in a way how I responded to it too, because as you probably know, because we started the school in China, we have a lot of parents, of course, that's a typical thing I hear, and they're saying, well, kids are in school all this time, like there's very limited things I can do. That's a very common complaint. Well, that's the education system is such that I have to. So I think as you said, I think what's really happening on the deep level is that we're surrendering our own rights of life, by saying that, right? Meaning like, because I have to work, 12 hours, that means my entire 12 hours is being controlled by some other person or structure or authority. Because my kids are in school, that's the education. That's why I basically surrender 100% of my choices to the system. But that's
Yes.
not true, right? Because even if you are in the 12 hours, there are a lot of things you can do differently.
Yes.
And especially for kids, I often point this out. I was like, well, kids are only in school less than 200 days a year, right? So if you think about it, and then like they're actually almost, similar amount of time they're not in school. And then
Yes.
don't surrender it just because the system work as such. But that unconscious surrendering is the real danger.
Yes. Yeah, and I think when you were saying that, and I totally agree, I was thinking a lot of times we stop doing what we want because we tell ourselves we have to know how.
Right.
And this is a challenge because if you set a goal to do something that you already know how to do, it's not a goal. It's a task. You've done it before. You've done it a million times. Goals are outside experience. Not I don't mean necessarily outside of your house, even though that would be cool too. I mean that tasks are things we've experienced already in life that we're going to do again. Goals are outside of our work and personal experience. We don't know that's actually the purpose of growth. We don't know how to do it. So by saying I want to do it and I will become it, then we have to learn. And I think that's the part people are because they're listening to us going, but I can't. And I'm saying, well, first you have to decide that you want to do it, then you can learn. But
Yeah.
if you stop at how will you do anything? That's the idea.
Yeah, exactly. I think you mentioned that earlier. You talk about like, we have all this, the other sort of very dominant, I would say, narrative or hidden narrative for us is that, I can't do it until when I'm ready. But the fact is that you will never be ready.
Yes.
So like, if you accept that fact, you will never be, and that will take away a lot of this unconscious
No.
constraint. That's
You'll
kind of
never be ready. You'll never be ready. And the world isn't changed by people who are ready. The
that's
world
right.
is changed by people who are unready. And it's the over prepared that actually don't get very much done. They're still
Because
preparing.
I love it. I'm busy preparing for what's gonna happen.
That's right. That's right.
You're missing from the scene. Yeah, exactly. So I want to put in a few words for the book. Again, as I said, I'm sure you're all enjoying this conversation as much as I do. But we can only touch, very little portion of the book. The book has 4 parts, and then the part 1, and then there are 10 chapters total. And then I think that I'll give you guys a bit of an overview of what this book covers. And again, 在购物车里面可以看到这本书，大家可以下单啊。The part one is called purpose. Is a stop managing time, start prioritizing attention, which we'll get back to this. I think this is right on, and that's very true in education as well. The core of education is all about attention. I often say that myself.
Yes.
That's part one, and then there's 3 chapters, and called one is make final calls your first cause. I love it. Again, there are a lot of tools. We'll get to it. I won't read everything, but for example, in this set, I think Richie put forward, is it this chapter or later, about the 7 questions, like question you can ask yourself about the final cause. And then we'll go to the second part. Part 2 is practices. First one is purpose, and second is practices, is a move from distraction to action. I think the things we talked about earlier is all about distraction, right? I'm not ready, I don't have time. and those seem to be legitimate reasons or rationales, but actually they're all, distractions in disguise. So how do we move from distraction to action? A lot of tools in there as well. And I have to say, put one thing is that the tools are not abstract, because the first impression I had when reading the book is that, well, there are so many people recommending this book. They're all kind of, I was like, wow, Richie has a lot of friends. But then when I started reading the book, I realized many of them are people whose life was touched by Ricky's practices and have changed. For example, there's this one person who's a Grammy Award winner, but she was actually a homeless teenager. Of course, on her bio, when recommending the book,
That's true.
right, I'm putting the endorsement. She appeared as she is the Grammy winner, but her story you can actually find in
Yeah.
right. And so there's the practices, and then
Yes.
part 3, we'll get to that. And part 3 is called payments, meaning like rewards, right? What do you get? And it said, don't turn dreams into jobs. And
Yes.
I'm sure you're curious what they're talking about. Touch a few things later. And then part 4, is prolifics, meaning like how do you, basically, propagate, like, get beyond goals, habits, and strength, not behind. So how do you move beyond them rather being, instead of chasing them, how do you actually, flip the game, go beyond them? So the 4 P's is purpose, practices, payments, and prolifics. And then those are the 4 parts of the book. And then they're, each have a few chapters. I'm sure when it's translated to Chinese, it kind of lost the 4P for sure. But but I
Probably.
think it's fully put. And then the Chinese version did an excellent job, portraying what's, being carried in those chapters as well. Anyway, so I wanted to put in a few words. So like, do get the book. You can find it, it's probably the best investment of your time, reading a book about anti-time management.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
my gosh.
And I want to go back to a few points I mentioned in the, again, I feel bad, our time is limited, but again, there are a few things you touched which really touched me. And then one, you talk about this, like the 3A sort of diagram called availability. Is it availability, ability, and what's the other A?
Autonomy. You're amazing. Oh my gosh. I can't believe you have all this memorized. That's amazing.
I read it. That's why I say I'm not reading. You are reading. I
Wow.
wouldn't know the word.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
cool.
And then that's beautiful. And then also I want to put in one more concept before you explain that one. And then if you read the English version of the cover, I have to apologize. I don't know what the Chinese cover looks like. It's a prism lens, a 三棱镜 in Chinese, right? So it's basically talking about, everybody has that image. It's like one thin light, white light comes through the prism lens. And of course it expands to this beautiful rainbow. And I think that's really the essence of what Richie is trying to say through this book, is that, once we, think differently, you use a lot of words of create. Even when you talk about the story of Natalie, you said you say she has courage in her, occasion of stroke. You said, I was really struck by that where you said she creates space for courage. Which is a very different way of saying that. Like, it's not like, sometimes we would say, hey, this so-and-so is a courageous person, so-and-so isn't, as if courage is this thing that, you're born with or born without. But you are just saying that, no, this is something you create space for. I think this entire book is about creating space.
It is.
Right?
It is. Yeah, it is. So for example, we wanted to be the type of parents that could also help other kids that are in need. That's why we had these foster kids. But we didn't go searching after these foster kids. It kind of just came into our lives. But because we had created space, we were able to welcome them in. And that's the idea is you may or may not become the person you want to become immediately, but you can at least try. And you then can at least create the space that you want for it to show up. Yeah. Because most people won't try at all. Mm-hmm. Everything's by default for most people. Everywhere in the world, they just show up, they do it, they don't think about what they really want, and they don't even try if they do. This really changes, the flavor of your life, if you will, because you'll start seeing the world through the lens of, oh, I can change, I can learn, I can do this, Yeah. So yeah, it's
and that space, I think when I was reading, I related to the available piece. Like when you say available, sometimes it's probably a very common use. Oh, I'm not available. I don't have time. But like when you say the creating space is basically you have so much more availability than you think. So can you talk to us a little bit about the 3 A's?
Oh, okay. So at one point in time, especially when I was a lot younger, I would look up to older people who were very wealthy, as a lot of us do. But they would tell me that work-life balance wasn't real. The whole idea you have to sacrifice, and then you get it. And you know what? That was true for them. And so, but I thought, but what if I don't want it to be that way?
Thank you very much. I don't like it.
So I started looking for examples of people that actually had a roundness to life. And so in the book, I call, instead of calling it balance, because, a balanced ball doesn't move. It means it literally, physically can stay put because it's balanced.
Yeah.
The idea of a balanced ball is that you can kick it or throw it in the direction you want it to go. So we don't actually want a stagnant life that is perfectly balanced. We want a life that we can throw into any direction that we want it to go. So I call it work-life flexibility. So work-life flexibility defined in the book is autonomy, which is you have the choice. Ability, meaning, I can't choose to fly a helicopter because I don't know how to fly a helicopter, right? So you have to have the ability. But then even if I knew how to fly a helicopter, and even if I could choose to, if I didn't have a helicopter, or I didn't have time to fly the helicopter, I wouldn't be available. So what I noticed where there were a lot of wealthy people who had all these resources. Like we say, I don't have resources, therefore I can't have time. They say the same thing, but the other way. They say, I have all these resources, but I don't have time. So the time piece is the creative piece.
Mm.
And you can do it whether you have resources or whether you don't. And in some ways, ironically, it's harder for people that have a lot of money and a lot of things happening to have time because they have to manage all this stuff. People are watching them. It's a bigger deal when they go out. Like it's a whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So the availability piece is important because you can have everything you want and not be available. So what I learned is, and I put a little matrix in there, there are people that will spend a lot of time working on something only to make a little bit of money. At the same time, there are people that will spend a little bit of time on something and make a lot of money. And we call that an asymmetrical result. So symmetrical would be balanced. Asymmetrical would be imbalanced in the direction you want it to go.
Yep.
So when you look at your goals and your projects, what you're looking for are, what are the few things I can do that will create the biggest results? Like that prism. So for example, when someone says, we don't always have control, and I get that the things we choose are better than what we had before, possibly. But I would just ask people to think, when you choose something, remember you're also choosing the consequence of that thing. You're choosing a responsibility. So when someone says they're going to move from the country to the city, they're also deciding they're going to be a city person. That's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's just a choice. So when they say I'm going to become a city person, that means their lifestyle has automatically become a city person lifestyle and everything that comes with it. If they didn't want to be a city person, they wanted to stay in the country, again, today with the internet, you might be able to do that. So where you choose what you're going to do next, people usually do based on how they're going to get paid. Because how you get paid determines how you live your lifestyle. And I'm not saying how much you're paid. I'm saying if you have to be sitting in a chair or working outside, that determines your lifestyle. It determines where you live, determines maybe who you marry, determines where your kids grow up. So if you can just think 2 steps ahead, just 2, and just say, what are the consequences of the choices that I'm going to make? And do I want them? Because if you don't, make another choice. That's it. And by the way, I don't know if you knew this, but I love China. I've been to China so many times. Just this year, I already went to, I'll probably say it wrong, but I went to Shanghai, I went to Dalian, I went to a few other cities, I went over to Hong Kong. I go several times a year, and everyone is doing magical work. Like the whole world is run by what is happening in China. Like no one can deny that, right? So there are the smartest people, the coolest people. There are the most amazing things happening. There's never been more choice than today in what you can do.
Mhm.
So take advantage of it. You know what I mean? Oh my gosh.
I love it. No, that's right. Because I think that's very powerful. Because I think, especially for people in China, because now it's a tricky time. You probably know as well. Like after COVID, all the economy and many sort of social issues surface. And I think I have, all my readers and people who are listening too probably have a shared sense of powerlessness, especially when you are in a certain, political structure, which, is very different from the US. And I hear a lot of that. They're saying, well, I wish I live in a different time. There are people would say that, right? So then, or if certain things change, I could live differently, which of course has an element of truth to it. But what I love about what you're saying and your book is basically saying you can do it now. You don't have to wait, for certain things up top, to some mysterious things happen. Of course we can have our wishes, but you can't. And then in that sense, then like, do you then put your life or experience or your family or your happiness as a expense or as a cost to that? It's very hard. And then, but usually when people were stuck is that, well, but I can't do it now. Like, yes, you're American, you can do it now. You can move to Oahu, you can like, we don't have that kind of freedom. But I think what's powerful about it is like we actually have a lot of places. Yes, there are certain things you don't, but there are actually a lot of places where you can have your freedom. Like for example, when you talk about play, like how you treat your kids, like how do you talk to them, right? And then like like you have 30 minutes together, what do you do? There actually, if you look, there are a lot of freedom you have, a lot of choices you could have. But I think the danger is that we gave up that choice, unconsciously when you're in a certain sort of macro environment, right?
Yep. All I can say is because everyone is under a certain system, we're also under interesting family systems. You know what I mean? Like even down the street from me, they might be going through something that I have no idea about. I can't control those people. You know what? That's the thing is, no matter where we live, and we're not downplaying it because it is harder and worse for other people. It is better and easier for other people. All I'm saying is the longer and more often you tell yourself that you can't, the more right you will be about it. If you can just say, but what am I in control of? Which shouldn't necessarily revolve around money. It should revolve around values. Who I want to become, who I want my kids to become, how I want to show up in the world, how I want to contribute and help other people. Those things don't cost money, but money can support it. So even if you have the worst job in the world and everyone's telling you the terriblest things, you internally say, yeah, but I make the choice of what I can do, where I can, and that's the best I can do. If anyone wants to learn more about that specifically, Viktor Frankl. Have you read? I mean, just read
And
that
search
guy's
for
stuff.
meaning.
You know,
Exactly.
just read that, and you're like, oh, okay, like okay, like that guy knows.
Exactly. Well, thank you for mentioning exactly because I've been recommending that book for at least like 10 years now. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
No, that's
yeah.
exactly right. And for people who didn't know, Viktor Frankl was a survivor from a Nazi camp. And then he basically talked about, even if you lost everything, all the freedom, you still have a freedom of choice.
Yes.
And you do not give that up. And then that's very powerful. I think and then exactly that's what oftentimes I say. You can complain your life is miserable, but you're better than him, right? Most of us are better than him.
Yes.
You can't
Yes.
compare.
That's right.
Exactly. Very powerful. Yeah. And then tell us about because I think, as I said in the book, once you get it, get a Chinese copy for yourself, and then the you will see there are a lot of graphics. I think there are a lot of like plots, like what Nisha has mentioned a few. And to talk a little bit about the time tipping. It's kind of complicated. We can't go through with the whole thing in the live stream, but like you did talk about sort of the triangle.
Okay.
When
So
what does time tipping mean? Yeah, how do we do it?
when I first started writing the book, I was going to title it Time Tipping, but then I settled on anti-time management because I would go back and forth between the two. Anti-time management makes a little more sense because we've heard the word time management, so it makes you think, what does this mean? Anti-time management. But time tipping is more of the operational part of anti-time management, where you first through the like you're explaining. I have a triangle that kind of explains the hierarchy of how to do things, but essentially, it would go like this: choose your purpose. Once you choose your purpose, then you can set your priorities, because most people say they have a priority, and priority or prior means first, but most people will put their priorities last.
Let's do that later when I'm done, when I'm
When
retired.
I'm done. So you have a purpose, you have a priority, then you create a project around it, then you create payments around it. Now, notice most people will choose how to get paid, and the rest just takes care of itself. This is their life. Where I'm not saying get paid last, but I'm saying that your payments, if possible, if they are around your projects, your priorities, and your purposes, you can now make meaning and money at the exact same time in the same place. You can still have meaning outside of where you make money, but in this sense, you can do it through your own projects. And
Yeah.
the fifth one would be prolifics.
Mm-hmm.
So let me make this make sense, the prolifics part, because this is important. There's a study done at one point where there's this classroom, and the teacher, it's like a pottery or a ceramics class, and the teacher tells them to make the perfect pot. And so their job is to make the perfect ceramic pot in class. The other classroom, he says, make as many pots as you want. Go crazy. Now, I'm ad-libbing. I'm sure he didn't say it the way I said it, okay? But what was interesting in the experiment was who made the more perfect pot? The person that tried to make a perfect one, or the people that did it over and over and over and over and over again. And of course, it was the people that eventually got more experience because they tried to do more things. So when someone's trying to live these ideas, the sooner you can do at least a part of the thing that you really, really want to do, the more happiness you'll find, the more joy you'll find. And let me say this is important. And I don't know what the words are in Chinese, so you'll have to help me here. But in English, we use the word joy and happy almost like they're the same thing, but they are different things. Happiness comes from circumstance. Joy comes regardless of circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Happiness comes because of things that we might do or say or things that happen to us, whereas joy comes from within. So if you want to be happy, do things that make you happy. If you want to have joy, live on purpose. So even when the things you're trying to do don't make you happy, you still feel good about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. There are different words. I think you can say joy and happy 快乐和幸福吧. Well, similar. I think, it means certain things are, if I have a birthday cake, I'm happy. But if I don't have a cake, I'm still joyful about my birthday.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
so
That's right.
exactly. There's different things too. And then I think the ultimate liberation is coming from the realization that what I have doesn't depend on the conditions outside, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's why joy is so ultimate, because you could, frankly, you could be in any situation. You can
Yes.
still decide, even the
Yes.
way I see it is different
Yes. Yes.
from
And
certain.
I want people listening to this to think about it this way, because I know when you think of your big dreams, they're also very hard to do because there's a lot of things that have to happen. But you can actually do really small things that bring you that same feeling of happiness and joy,
Mhm.
regardless of your circumstance. That said, I want you to also break through the mental barrier and create impossible goals. Like, think impossible things. Like, stop playing small. Like, think way bigger. You need these giant things to pull, not just pull yourself out of yourself, but to pull the future to you. You need to think so big that you're like, I have to make this happen. It motivates you. So every time you say, oh, but I can't because of my circumstance, you also say, so what? That will help you.
Exactly. And I want to add a little dirty trick to that. And then also,
Okay.
when I in that situation, I would say, yeah, I'm too small. But I was like, well, other people are smaller.
There you go. There you go. It's true. It's true. You're like, I need to do something with this, It's true.
Right, exactly. I was like, yeah, I have all those constraints, but I look around, they all have those constraints too. Like, so
Yes.
you're
Yes.
not worse off. Well, thank you. That's very powerful. And I think I want to go back to a bit of the one you mentioned around work-life balance, because as you probably imagine, as a former women executive, that's what I get asked a lot. And I also didn't like that word, because I said, first of all, it gave you a false goal, as if there's something called a balance, you're just not there yet, right? So first of all, that doesn't exist. And second, I think balance give you a sense it's very fragile, right? Because it's a very fine balance, and you might like destroy it any minute. Because if you have a balance, you can mentalize it. Like that means you could something happen, one child gets sick, right, or whatever, just the market crashes on something, like then the balance is gone. So it's very fragile. It's like then it's something that even if you achieve it, it's momentary. You can't really get it. So like if you're after something like that, then it's sort of a pipe dream, right? And then, but what I realized that is that what people are this image actually exude a lot of fear, because if you're trying to think about that image of this very fine balance, if I don't get there, or even if I get there, there's a lot of fear behind it. Like, what if it get topped over? What if something change? And I think, of course, you didn't say much in your book, but your book is basically fearless. Everything is about, okay, how you dealt with your fear, which is probably the deepest blocker.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about like how, how was your journey with fear? Because all those questions are really fear-packed questions. They present themselves in different ways. But somehow, like, I think you're almost like a samurai, sort of, with a sword.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Well, let's not pretend that fear really ever goes away, right? Like it's that whole idea of courage. You have to tackle it and identify it for what it is. But let me give you an example. I live by the beach, and I live where there are giant waves, like the biggest waves. Some of the biggest waves in the world are right in my backyard. And I have a friend that was surfing out there, and he got caught up. I'll try and show what my hand. He got caught up on the lip of the wave up here because the wind was blowing, and he came crashing down, and his board came down and hit him on the leg like an axe, like chopped his leg, broke his femur in half. Okay, this is gross, I know. And he was going to drown. Someone saw him and helped him get in. Long story short, I asked him, I said, are you going to go back out there surfing, again? And they had to put a metal pole in his leg to fix it and all this kind of stuff. And it was only a few weeks later when he was feeling better. I don't know how he healed so fast. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to go surf those big waves again. I go, what's wrong with you? I go, what's wrong with you? Well, then I got like kind of serious. I was like the author in me. I was like, what does he mean? Like, And he says, I said, aren't you scared? And he said, of course I'm scared. We're all scared out there, but he'd be more scared not doing it because it's fun. He likes it. It's part of his purpose. It's part of what he does. And what I realized was kind of like a mama bear protecting her cubs. She will come out, right, and do anything to protect them, even if it might hurt her, right? And I realized he didn't just go out there and start surfing giant waves. And I think that's where people get mixed up. You don't just start some multi-million-dollar business. It doesn't just happen. It happens over time. He started with very small waves, learned how to fall over and over and over again until he got comfortable enough to be in big waves. So when he fell off a big wave, he was also comfortable enough to get back up from a big wave and do it again. So I think that a lot of times when people are afraid of doing something, a lot of times they're afraid because they're either inexperienced and maybe they should be scared, but they need to realize they can learn. But the weird part is when people are actually super experienced, and because it's such a hard fall to start something new, like it's embarrassing, they would rather not try. Even though doing the small little stupid things made them successful, they're unwilling to do it again because it's embarrassing, right? Mm-hmm. That's called pride. So I think this is the key. It's name it to tame it. Name it to tame it. Like if you can name what the fear is, you can then tame the fear, because usually the fear you're trying to overcome, as soon as it's named, isn't a fear anymore. In fact, it's probably not something you're even going to experience. It was probably made up. And then you can move it away and do the parts that are in your control. But you have to also believe that if you do fall, that you will have in that moment somehow magically the courage to get back up. Mm-hmm. And anyone who has tried and failed, which is all of us, knows they have that within them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's quite powerful. I think indeed, because I think also there's a beautiful part of our psychology that, when something looks very daunting before you do it, and you do it and you fail, and when you look back, you actually will try to justify, yourself for it. Like it's not that bad.
Right.
I think that's why, but the courage of going through it is all it takes. But I love what you said. Basically, we just like how you build up muscle. You actually need, sort of weight training for your fear. You start practicing and giving yourself opportunity or exposure. Like when you say, name it to tame it. Also, I think it's sort of exposure therapy. Like totally. Once you're exposed to it, because when it's the biggest enemy is the enemy you created in your mind. And once
that's so true.
Right? Once you just know with it, it's not that bad. Of course, I'm sure, your friend has gone through a lot of suffering, but I mean, a lot of pain, but, indeed, I think that's very nice. I have a few last questions. I think I'll let you go. And then one is that I'm sure all my readers or people listening to this will be curious. You have, basically many children. And then for 2 years when you're fostering, you have, 6, right? And then I'll ask you $1 million question. Like, as you, who's as in many people's eyes, very successful and a very deep thinker, what are the 3 most common things you say to your children as a dad?
Okay. I haven't really thought about that before, but I'll tell you this. And this might sound normal for some people or abnormal for others, but I say I love you so much all day, every day. And I do know that there are some families or even cultures that will hold that back, even though they love them for certain reasons. I don't understand exactly why, but I just say it constantly. And the reason is because it's a terrible thought, but I think if this is the last time I ever see them, I want them to know this is the last thing I said to them, or last time that they ever see me, and so that's just something important for me. I say I love you constantly.
Sweet. I'm very easy. Okay. Excellent.
But yeah. Other things that I say to them, I try to ask, kids are kids. moms and dads aren't supposed to be cool. You know what I mean? Even though, even like, I'm not trying to pretend like I'm like the cool dad here, you know, like I'm not trying like, but what I do try to ask them questions that somehow they will answer. You know what I mean? So if it's like, how was school? They might not say anything. But if I'm like, what was the most fun part? You know what I mean? Then maybe they'll engage. So I'll try to ask questions that get engagement. The other thing too is maybe not something I say, but something I do. There's this example of, especially with teenagers, that maybe between a parent and a teenager, even kids too, there might be a brick wall between us. It's an invisible brick wall. Okay, this is an analogy I've learned before from a mentor of mine. But like sometimes there's a loose brick that you can poke through to kind of see through the other side, you know what I mean, what's going on. And the loose brick is something that your kids are interested in. So even if you're not if you're not into K-pop, but they are, now you are. You know what I mean? And not in a weird way, but like you were happy to have them go to this concert or go with them to this concert or buy it. Like you become interested and less interesting, and that seems to be a good thing to do.
Give it out to the teenager parents here, and that's so typical. Exactly, the invisible wall. But I think the other, I'll almost have an immediate follow-up question, because I get this question a lot myself. Is that, okay, what if what they're interested in is something bad? Okay, bad meaning, like, for example, they're into video games, they're on their iPad all the time, and then I want to get them off it. Like, this is the last thing I want to talk to him about.
I know that's really hard. I think, okay, what I would say to that is, ask yourself, how bad is it? Is it the kind of bad that's going to get them into physical, spiritual, actual, literal trouble and hurt them? Or is it the kind of bad that you just don't like it and wish they were doing something else? Because those are two different things. You know what I mean? Because there would be a case for someone saying that video games help them somehow, and they're going to get a job that involves video games. You know what I mean? So like, there's a place to go with that. But what I would say though for that one is just, as long as it's not hurting them or harming them, for our purposes, it's not about the thing. It's about connecting. That's what we're talking about. So maybe you might just need to close your eyes and let them and their friends eat everything out of the refrigerator, and who cares? Like, you just have to let it happen. Okay.
Okay, brilliant. Exactly. So it's about connection, and then I think that's I actually say exactly the same thing. And then we're saying, if the success of parenting is not about what kind of school they go to. I mean, of course, they will probably go to good schools or get their good job. But you will be on their list of people they want to talk to.
Yeah.
Right. And then you just make it to the list.
Yeah. It's a hard list to get on.
Right. Because by default you're not on the list, right? Like,
That's right.
Right. Excellent. All right. So this is such a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for all this wisdom. And I know all the laughter. I really enjoyed it.
Yes. Same.
And again, for anyone who's listening, if you enjoy this conversation, you like what you heard, first of all, you can get this book on the shopping cart. And also, if you Google Richie's name, Richie Norton, he has a website, and the website has, his lectures, his books, and things he do. And you will find it very interesting. And I want to, just give me 1 second. I want to pull up, because I actually copied that sentence from your book. I think it's really well said. You talked about the intention. I think the intention is brilliant. You talked about, you say, I wrote this book to help you create high trust environments with attention to time. Dash, the mother of all resources. Dash, for greater contribution in the service of others while leading a life of meaning and joy, despite setbacks and even tragedy. So beautifully said. I love that intention. Yeah. And then I love how you basically everything you said in the interview was in that sentence.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for pulling that out. I never had anyone do that before on a podcast. So that was pretty cool. So thank you. And that's it. Like, when it comes to family and children and your most important values and your work, you want to be available. You want to have an abundance of available time, so that when stuff comes up, like when I go on road trips with my children and my wife, we go on these big trips together, I'm not prodding and poking and asking a bunch of weird questions and making them hate me. I might do that too. Okay. Maybe I do that too, but the fact that we have time together just sitting there means that there's more opportunities for stuff to just come up.
Yeah.
And when stuff if you're not around, if you're not at the crossroads of their lives, that should become a goal of yours. How can I be around at the crossroads of their lives so that I can be there for their most important moments? At least do my best to do it, because I know it might not always be possible, but they'll know I tried. That they love that. Kids love that.
Yeah, and they end up appreciating that, and then
Yeah.
even if it's later. And I wanted to plug in this very last thing, because you mentioned your the beginning of your book. You talked about that, the missile, the false missile alert. It is real. I know, because you will probably have the same question as me, saying, "Wow, this looks so dramatic. It must be made up, for the book to sell." No, it's real. You can look it up yourself. It happened on January 13th, 2018. And it lasted 38 minutes. So it was, I think it was about 8 o'clock in the morning. And that's when the false alarm came out to everybody living in Oahu, and talking about this, ballistic missile. And yeah, and then that was true. And I think that's probably it's the beginning. It's I also want you to use this to wrap it up, because I think that thought that passed through your mind were so powerful, is this whole concept of living with no regrets, despite all the love we have, of course. But don't wait till too late, right? I think
that's right. That's right. Yeah. So anyone listening to this, your future regrets are today's imperative. Like, if you feel like there's something in the future that you would regret not doing, then that's probably what you should do now. And if you do it now, you end up living multiple lives. Not like literally, but you end up living like this cool life that you experience. And then because you already did it, new dreams bubble up. It's amazing. It's amazing. So you don't have to wait.
There you go. So wonderful. Thank you so much again, Richie. And I hope you, just as myself, utterly enjoy this conversation. And make sure you buy the book.
Thank you. You're amazing. Thanks everybody for listening too. That was really cool. Honored. Thank you. That was a great interview. I really appreciate you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.